We traveled to Porto and we just loved it. We fell in love with the city. We love, it's got the river, it's got a city feel, but it's not too overwhelming of a city. And then it's also really close to the beach.
Yeah.
They love having kids. You see kids all over the place. And I think that in restaurants, and they're well behaved because of it, because they've just grown up always doing that.
Yes.
So you have them there, and all the time I'll see us smiling or waving at someone. I look around and there's a little Portuguese lady who's just, making faces and stuff.
On this week's episode, I'm joined by Josh and Kalie. Josh and Kalie are originally from the US and are the hosts and the creators of the popular YouTube channel Expats Everywhere. Josh and Kalie have lived all over the world in places like Madrid, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and South Korea, and have now been living in Portugal happily for the last 3 years with their young daughter. We discuss, amongst other things, what they're up to with their YouTube channel, why they chose to move to Portugal, what has kept them in Portugal for more than 3 years, and Josh and Kalie talk about how you can go from being an expat to becoming a local. For those of you listening, head over to our YouTube channel to watch some of this episode, and for those of you watching, click down below and subscribe. And for the full podcast episode, go to Google, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And now, over to my conversation with Josh and Kalie. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life, and I'm delighted to be joined here by Josh and Kalie. Guys, I don't even know your surnames. This is bad hosting.
That's all good.
We generally don't put that out there in public, I think, just because we're in the public eye as well, right?
Yeah.
All right. So Josh and Kalie, no surname from Expats Everywhere. Guys, thanks for being on the podcast. How are you?
Doing well.
Doing really well.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be back in Portugal.
Sounds good. Why don't you just start off telling us a little bit about the two of you, what you do, where you're from?
Yeah. So we're from the United States. We're from different parts of the US, but kind of East Coast, if that gives anyone a subcultural point of reference. But we moved abroad in 2009. We moved to Spain and we lived in Madrid for a couple of years, and we found kind of living abroad to be more interesting than living in the US. So it wasn't a matter of like, let's move back to the US, let's move back home. It was like, where are we going to move to next? So the last, let's say almost 15 years has taken us from Spain to South Korea, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and then now Portugal. We've been here for 3 years. It's been a great life.
That sounds incredible. I mean, how did Portugal start for you guys? How did you end up looking at Portugal as a place to move to?
Yeah, so when we lived in Madrid, we traveled a lot, as much as we could. We had very low wages, but traveling around Europe is quite affordable, which is nice. So since they're so close, we one day I think found a cheap flight to Porto. I think Porto was our very first place that we landed in Portugal.
That's right.
And there was a cheap flight. We thought, well, we don't know much about Portugal. And honestly, back in 2009, 2010, Americans didn't know where Portugal was. You'd be like, we're going to Portugal. And they'd be like, where is that? What is that? So that's when we used to call it like the hidden gem, because it was really nice. No one knew about it. Now it's obviously become quite a hot spot. So we traveled to Porto and we just loved it. We fell in love with the city. We love, it's got the river, it's got a city feel, but it's not too overwhelming of a city. And then it's also really close to the beach. And being in Madrid, which is a big city, we liked that it was a little bit of a slower pace, even though we were younger at the time and we really enjoyed our time in Madrid. We kind of just thought one day we'd love to live in Porto. And we traveled to a lot of places, and it was rare for us to circle back to a city because there's always there's more to see, right? You want to go to new places. But Porto was one of those places that we circled back to a couple times when we lived in Madrid. And we just thought one day we'll live here. But then we went off to Asia, and it took a while to get back to Portugal. But now we're here.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about Expats Everywhere and what you guys are up to for those that aren't aware of your channel.
Yeah, sure. So we created the channel some years back. I guess it was around the time that we were living in Saudi Arabia. We were making another move abroad and having to find resources online to help facilitate the move. And we got the bright idea of creating a YouTube channel to put videos out there where we interviewed people, kind of like this, where we interviewed people about their experience living in that place and what it took, for them to do it. Long story short, when we lived in Singapore, we started to develop a bit more in terms of the production side and understand how to make better videos. And then when we were in the US, 2019, 2020, we started to really zone in on Portugal itself because that's where we were moving. We decided instead of always having the camera facing out at other people. We would turn the camera back on ourselves and start to vlog about our experience moving to Portugal in and of itself. And then that's really when the channel took off.
But in terms of how long did you stay in all the other places that you were? I mean, how long were you in Madrid for, and then how long were you in the other? I think it was 3 countries.
Yeah. So 2 years in Madrid, 2 years in Busan, 2 years in Ahasa, Saudi Arabia. No, sorry, 1 year in Ahasa, Saudi Arabia, 4 years in Singapore, and then now we're starting our 4th year here in Portugal. We finished 3, starting 4.
Yeah. So I mean, what are the things that have kept you here? You know, you're used to kind of moving and trying out different places, but what are the things that you think have kept you guys in Portugal a little bit longer?
We've just kind of adapted to the pace of life, even though sometimes it's frustrating. We get it. We love kind of the people that are in our community, both Portuguese and foreigners. So we've adapted in that way. We have our daughter settled in school here. We all 3 want to walk away from this experience whenever we do walk away from Portugal, knowing Portuguese, like knowing it, like actually having it as a fluent language in our back pocket, where we were never able to get fluency in Spanish. Definitely didn't even scratch the surface with Arabic.
Or
My Korean, I
too.
can like phonetically know what things are said, like
Yeah.
on signs and whatnot. But I think those are the main things that I see, but you probably see a few others.
Right. Well, since we've been doing this for a while, we're obviously in a different stage of life. When we first moved, I had just graduated from university. Josh had just been working for a couple of years, and so you're younger. I think there's more to explore, more to do. You have a different lifestyle overall. That's why Madrid was amazing. It's a very big, buzzing, go out really late, stay out late, young environment, and we loved that. I could not do that again at my age and with a kid. I just wouldn't want to actually live really like downtown in the middle of Madrid like we had before. Knowing that we wanted to come back to Portugal and Porto specific, what I think keeps us here is we're becoming more and more comfortable with the language, which is helpful. Obviously, when you speak the language, you just feel more comfortable in your own skin and getting around and doing different things, navigating different things that are a little tricky, like going to a hospital or something like that. But also still having English to lean on. But then the Portuguese people are so nice, so open and welcoming. So once you meet a couple, then you meet their friends, and you get to learn about a lot of new things about their culture and their city. And then for me, like the cafe culture, I love that type of just hanging out with friends, doing those types of things, which is kind of laid back and relaxed. So it's just a really nice type of living that where we are right now with the stage of life, we maybe don't want to move around as much as we had, especially now having a 4-year-old, thinking about schools and just not moving around too much. So I think that's why we'll be here a bit more longer term than other places at the stage of life we're in. They love having kids. You see kids all over the place, and I think that in restaurants, and they're well behaved because of it, because they've just grown up always doing that.
Yes.
So you have them there, and all the time I'll see us smiling or waving at someone. I look around, and there's a little Portuguese lady who's just making faces and stuff. Or something for me that I thought I loved, like when Valencia was even younger, and I would just walk around, like when she was 2 in the stroller. We'd walk by maybe like an 18, 19-year-old boy, and he'd wave at her. He's so used to having kids around, whether it's from his family or his extended family, that he's comfortable with that. Whereas in the States, I think you get a lot of boys in a certain like age range where they're just like, oh, kids, I don't know what to do with kids. They're awkward and everything. But it's not like that here, because they're so family oriented and they do things as families, that kids are just part of a daily life.
We sometimes pass our neighbors out, like going to the elevator. And if they're coming back in from going and grabbing groceries, they love to give our daughter grapes. Like they just like to pass off like a bunch of grapes to her. They've got a big crate of them. And Kalie and I were over at the property that we're developing, and we picked some lemons because our lemon tree is just flush right now with lemons. We picked a bunch of lemons, and we asked our daughter if she would like to go give lemons, to our neighbors. So we knock on their doors and everything. And just like kind of the reaction and the warmth between that exchange was just really beautiful. And it's not something that I ever really felt in the States. Not that I had bad neighbors or anything, but it's just different. It's a little more, it's just warmer and more genuine.
Talk a bit about the Portuguese language, what people should be aware of, because it's not an easy language.
So I think for me, what I've tried to do is remind myself that, yes, I want to be working towards fluency daily, trying to do a little bit every day, as opposed to like a big, 2-3 hour cram session once a week. It's better for me to just try to do 15 to 20 minutes if that's all I have. If I can do half an hour to 45 minutes, great. So I think it's just the kind of the daily commitment to at least 15-20 minutes a day doing that.
Guys, your channel's called Expats Everywhere, but I mean, for people that want to go from being an expat to a local, I mean, in Portugal, what would you recommend? Little things that you've learned along the way that you think will be helpful?
Oh, that's a
Well,
great
language
question.
is a must. Yeah, it is a great question. Language is a must. I mean, I think that's the thing that separates a lot of expats from becoming more in their community is that language component, because I find that a lot of expats, not just in Portugal, but just all around the world, they tend to flock to their own, which is common. But the problem is when you do that, you can very quickly isolate yourself.
Yeah.
You've got to get yourself out there, join like hobby groups or interest groups that have Portuguese people in it. And I think that's probably the fastest way for you to make friends and help with your language acquisition. And you're doing it in something that you already enjoy.
Going around what's local to you, like the bakeries and maybe the butcher shops and the little fruit shops, rather than like big grocery runs. So like I think you have to kind of get away from what you knew as normal life in your home country and start adapting and watching how the Portuguese are doing things, So for example, instead of going to Starbucks for your daily coffee, the Portuguese go to a little cafe, they stand up and drink their little shot of espresso and then they go. I mean, is that something that you could adapt to? You maybe don't want to, but little things like that, like watching the Portuguese and how they do stuff. I think that's the biggest thing. We see a lot of people move to a place and they still cling on to, like Josh said, the products that they need. But like, do you need it? Can you find something that's more local? Because then life just becomes more comfortable when you find your go-tos in that aspect, and not thinking it has to be how it was the previous years for me in my home country.
Guys, a question that we ask all of our guests. Kalie, you can go first, and then Josh. Portugal, the simple life. Why?
Oh, the simple life. That is a good question. I would say Portugal is a simple life because of the culture that they have here. And one of the main reasons I want to move back to Europe and specifically to Portugal is because of the cafe culture. And that is a simple life. It's very nice and comforting to sit out at a cafe outside or inside. Like you said, everyone knows your name, especially if it's a place that's around you. But just it's simple because you're hanging out with friends, you're enjoying life, whether it's in the morning with a coffee or in the afternoon with a glass of wine. And it's just slower pace, and I love it. I just love that aspect of sitting, hanging out with friends, and just interacting with the people around you in the same cafe.
Portugal, the simple life. If you are a young family or if you're a retiree, I would say that Portugal is a very simple life that you should choose, because why complicate it with the mess that could be living in a place that is overly complicated? You have deep relationships that you can develop here. You've got a great cost of living. For most of the year, you have wonderful weather. So in that regard, it's a simple life. People love kids. They love families. For retirees, you're well taken care of. So
It's a good balance.
Those are the reasons for me.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for having
Dylan.
us.
Appreciate it, man.
And you know this part, I'm going to let you call it. This is where you say that's a wrap.
Oh, that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
So thank you once again to our guests, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We always love to hear from you. Don't forget, Portugal the Simple Life also has a magazine, so download it. It's for free. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, and as we say in Portugal, sejas bem-vindo. Welcome to the Simple Life.